This will be the last flight you ever work. The words came out quietly, the way a door closing in an empty house comes out quietly. No drama, no raised voice, just the particular finality of something that cannot be taken back once it has been said out loud. Brianna Cole's palm was still hovering in the air, still tingling from the impact, still registering what her own hand had just done, and the man standing in front of her had not moved, had not flinched, had not raised his voice or his other hand or anything at all. He had simply reached up and touched his cheek with 2 fingers, and then lowered his hand, and on that hand, catching the soft overhead light of the first-class cabin in a way it had not caught before, was a ring. Not an expensive ring in the way that word usually means. Not diamonds, not platinum, not the kind of thing that announces itself from across a room. It was a signet ring, dark gold, with a small star etched into its face. A star that every single person who worked for Northstar Airlines would have recognized in their sleep, because it was the same star on the tail of every plane in the fleet, on every uniform, on every boarding pass that had ever been handed to a passenger at a gate in the 18 years since the airline had existed. Brianna saw it. The color left her face in stages, the way light leaves a room when the sun goes down, first from her cheeks, then from around her eyes, then from her lips, until what remained was something pale and very still. A woman who understood in the space between one heartbeat and the next exactly what she had done, and exactly who she had done it to. Around them, the first-class cabin of Northstar Flight 1847 from Atlanta to New York held its breath. Phones were already raised. Some passengers had been recording for the last 40 minutes. Others had only just lifted their screens in the final seconds before the slap. But all of them were watching now, and the silence that filled the cabin was not the comfortable silence of cruising altitude. It was the silence that comes after something breaks. The man turned away from Brianna without another word, sat back down, and cupped his 6-year-old daughter's face in both hands. "It's okay, baby," he said softly. "Daddy's right here. 6 hours earlier." The morning came in through the kitchen window of a modest townhouse on the east side of Atlanta, the way mornings do in late October, slow, gray-golden, unhurried, and Isaiah Drummond stood at the counter drinking coffee in dark jeans and a plain white button-down shirt, looking like exactly what he had decided to look like today, a regular man taking his daughter on a trip. He was 38 years old, and if you passed him on the street, you would see a tall black man with close-cut hair and the kind of calm that sits in the body rather than on the face, the calm of someone who has been through enough that ordinary turbulence no longer moves him the way it once did. You would not see, unless you knew where to look, the particular weight he had been carrying for the last 18 months, ever since the hospital, and the white walls, and the thing that happened there that he still did not have a clean word for. You would also not see, unless you were very close, the signet ring on his right hand. Dark gold, a small Northstar star etched into its face, worn every business day for the 3 weeks since the acquisition papers were signed, and the company became through a chain of holding companies and a very quiet board vote. His. "Daddy." The voice came from the hallway, small and urgent. "Pepper needs his own seatbelt." Nadia appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing her purple sneakers on the wrong feet and clutching a stuffed elephant the size of a cantaloupe, gray worn soft from 2 years of constant handling. One ear slightly darker than the other from being held during thunderstorms and doctor's visits and the long nights after her mother died. "Pepper can share yours," Isaiah said. "That's not safe," Nadia said with the absolute conviction of someone who has thought about this carefully. Isaiah set down his coffee, crossed the kitchen, and crouched in front of his daughter. He straightened her sneakers without making a thing of it, then looked at the elephant. "Pepper can sit on your lap and you can hold him during takeoff. That's even safer than a seatbelt." Nadia considered this with the particular gravity of a 6-year-old weighing actual options. "Okay," she decided. "But I'm holding him the whole time." The whole time, Isaiah agreed. He stood and caught the framed photograph on the hall table on his way to pick up the bags. Renee at 29, laughing at something just outside the frame, her head thrown back, Nadia's exact nose on a woman's face. Nadia reached out as she passed it the way she always did, 2 fingers touching the glass for just a second, the way you touch something you want to make sure is still there. Isaiah picked up both suitcases and did not let himself stand in front of the photograph for longer than was practical. The plan for today was simple and he believed necessary. 3 weeks ago, Isaiah had finalized the acquisition of Northstar Airlines through a holding company, buying a controlling stake in the mid-sized carrier that had been struggling for 2 years with financial losses and a customer service reputation that its own internal surveys described in the careful language of corporate documents as inconsistent. Isaiah had read those surveys. He had also read the complaint logs and the HR closure rates, and the 23 documented grievances filed by passengers of color over the previous 18 months, all of which had been closed without meaningful action. He wanted to see what those numbers looked like in a seat, his own seat. No announcement, no advance notice to crew, no special treatment, just a first-class ticket purchased through the website, the same as anyone else, and a window to see what the airline he now owned actually did when no one important was watching. His COO Raymond Osei had called it reckless. Isaiah had called it necessary. They had reached the familiar compromise of Raymond worrying loudly while Isaiah did the thing anyway. The car was waiting outside. Nadia took Isaiah's hand at the door, Pepper tucked under her other arm, and they walked out into the gray-gold Atlanta morning together. Hartsfield-Jackson Airport was doing what it always did on a Tuesday morning in October, moving approximately 40,000 people in approximately 40,000 directions simultaneously with the particular organized chaos of a place that has been doing this long enough to make it look almost calm from a distance. Isaiah and Nadia moved through it the way Isaiah had learned to move through crowded public spaces over the years, steadily, without urgency. Nadia's hand in his, her small purple sneakers keeping pace with his longer stride. He had learned this particular way of moving a long time ago, unhurried enough not to seem threatening, purposeful enough not to invite the kind of attention that comes when a black man appears to be uncertain about where he belongs. The first-class check-in counter had 2 agents working it, and the one on the left was finishing with a white couple in matching luggage when Isaiah and Nadia stepped up to the second position. The agent there, young blonde, name tag reading Kelsey, looked up from her screen, and something crossed her face in the half-second before her customer service expression reassembled itself. Something that was not quite a smile, and not quite its opposite. Checking in, she asked, her tone landing in the particular register of someone who has already formed an opinion about the transaction they're about to conduct. "Yes," Isaiah said. Isaiah and Nadia Drummond. Atlanta to New York. Kelsey typed slowly with the deliberate attention of someone looking for a reason rather than a result. She glanced at her screen, then at Isaiah, then back at her screen. "And how are these tickets booked?" she asked. "Online," Isaiah said. "Same as anyone else." She typed something. "First class." "First class," Isaiah confirmed and handed over his ID and Nadia's documentation without being asked. Kelsey examined both with the thoroughness usually reserved for documents that are expected to be fraudulent, then scanned the boarding passes, which beeped green immediately and without hesitation, as boarding passes do when they are entirely in order, which these were. "Everything seems to be." She paused a half-beat too long in order. She handed the passes back with a smile that was assembled from the correct component parts, but achieved nothing. "Enjoy your flight." Isaiah took the passes, thanked her, and moved on without the satisfaction of letting his expression change. The TSA priority lane for first-class passengers was moving quickly, which was the point of the priority lane, and the 2 white executives ahead of Isaiah walked through the scanner without breaking stride, their laptop bags appearing on the belt and disappearing again with the easy rhythm of people who have done this 1,000 times. Isaiah placed his bag on the belt, walked through the scanner, and was directed aside by a TSA agent for additional screening before the scanner had fully registered his exit. He stood with his arms out while the agent ran the wand patient, and still. Daddy, Nadia said from the other side of the belt where she had stopped to wait. Pepper clutched in both arms. "Why do they need to check your shoes?" The agent had the decency to look at a spot slightly to the left of Isaiah's face rather than directly at him. "Sometimes they just need to make extra sure," Sweetheart Isaiah said the way he had said some version of this sentence at some version of this moment more times than he could count. And he stepped back into his shoes and picked up Nadia's hand, and they walked to the gate. Boarding had already begun for first class when they arrived, and the gate agent, a tired-looking man in his 50s, scanned their passes without looking up, then looked up when the scanner beeped its confirmation, as if the sound surprised him, and then looked down again. "Enjoy your flight," he said to the middle distance. The jet bridge was narrow and smelled of industrial carpet and recycled air, and Nadia skipped every third step the way she always did when she was excited about something, so that Isaiah had to shorten his stride to keep from pulling her forward. At the aircraft door, a young black man in a Northstar uniform turned from the galley with a genuine smile, the kind that arrives before the customer service brain has time to regulate it, spontaneous and warm. His name tag read James Okafor. "Welcome aboard," he said, and meant it, and knelt briefly to Nadia's level. "Is this your first flight?" Nadia held up Pepper. "His too," she said seriously. James nodded, matching her gravity perfectly. "Then I'll make sure you both have a great one." He straightened, caught Isaiah's eye, and gave him the simple nod of one adult acknowledging another without ceremony. Behind James in the galley doorway, a woman in her late 40s stood arranging a tray of pre-departure champagne flutes with the focused precision of someone who takes great pride in the alignment of things. Her hair was platinum blonde, pulled back tight, and her Northstar uniform was immaculate in the way that uniform is immaculate when the person wearing it understands it as a kind of armor. Her name tag read Brianna Cole, lead flight attendant. She registered Isaiah and Nadia's arrival with a glance that lasted exactly half a second too long before she turned back to the tray. Isaiah guided Nadia to seats 2A and 2B, lifted her carry-on into the overhead bin, and helped her settle Pepper on her lap. Through the window, the tarmac workers moved in their orange vests against the gray morning sky, and Nadia pressed her face to the glass and watched them with the total unguarded attention of someone experiencing something for the very first time. Brianna arrived at their row 3 minutes into boarding, while the aisle behind them was still filling with passengers arranging overhead bins and settling into seats, and she arrived with her hands clasped in front of her, and her voice pitched at the particular temperature of professionally delivered suspicion, not cold enough to be reported, not warm enough to be believed. "Good morning," she said, and then before Isaiah could respond in kind, "Are you sure you're in the right section? Sometimes the gate agent will scan the wrong boarding pass by mistake, and—" "These are our seats," Isaiah said. He kept his voice level and produced the boarding passes from his front pocket, holding them out so she could see both the seat numbers and the first-class designation without needing to reach for them. 2A and 2B. Brianna took the passes with the deliberate care of someone who intends to find something wrong, examined them for a moment that stretched past the length of time any genuine uncertainty would require, and returned them. Of course, she said the two words carrying a freight of reluctant concession that the situation in no way required. "Let me know if you need anything." She moved on without waiting to see if they did. Nadia, who had been watching this exchange with the quiet attentiveness of a child who has learned to read rooms the way other children learn to read books, held Pepper a little tighter and turned back to the window without saying anything. Isaiah sat. He watched Brianna work the rest of the first-class cabin. The difference was not subtle. She knew the couple in 1A and 1B by name. Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield, so wonderful to have you with us again, and offered them pre-departure champagne with the warmth of someone welcoming friends into her home, asking after their recent trip to Portugal with the attentiveness of genuine interest. She spent 3 minutes with the businessman in 3C, recommending the window seat for the approach into JFK. She brought a coloring book unprompted to a white child of about Nadia's age in 4A, kneeling to present it like a small gift. She did not bring Nadia a coloring book. She did not offer their rose champagne or water or any pre-departure beverage at all. Nadia had taken out Pepper and was showing him the window, narrating the tarmac activity in a low, patient voice, explaining to the elephant what all the people in orange vests were doing and why the plane was so big. Isaiah watched his daughter and did not watch Brianna, but noted with the particular peripheral awareness of a man who has spent decades monitoring rooms. He wasn't fully welcome in every row that received attention and every row that didn't. And the pattern was not ambiguous. Across the aisle in 3A, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and the upright posture of someone who had once sat on a bench was watching the same thing Isaiah was watching. His name was Thomas Aldridge, though Isaiah didn't know that yet. His expression was the expression of a man who recognizes what he is seeing and is deciding what to do about it. When Nadia turned from the window and held Pepper out toward the aisle, extending the elephant in the universal gesture of a child trying to make a connection with an adult who has caught her attention, Brianna was passing their row. She didn't slow down. She walked past Pepper's outstretched gray trunk as if neither the elephant nor the child holding it existed, and Nadia lowered her arms slowly and looked at Isaiah with a question in her face that she didn't yet have the words to ask. Isaiah put his hand over hers. "She's very busy getting everything ready," he said, which was technically true the way a lot of things are technically true. His phone buzzed. Raymond, his COO board member, may have mentioned new ownership to Inner Circle. Preparing communication statement, need your guidance before we release anything. Also recommend you surface your presence on this flight if situation warrants. Isaiah read it twice and put the phone back in his pocket. The acquisition wasn't the point of today. Today was still the experiment. Today was still about what the airline was when no one important was watching. He looked out the window at the tarmac and let the boarding noise fill the space where a different man might have let his anger go. 20 minutes after takeoff with Atlanta, already a grid of brown and green tilting away below them, and the seatbelt sign dimmed to off. James Okafor moved through the first-class cabin with the digital flight manifest open on his tablet, doing the routine pre-service check that every lead attendant runs before beverage service begins, confirming dietary flags, identifying priority passengers, noting any special circumstances that require crew awareness before the cart goes out. He found it on line 17. Drummond Nadia R., Seat 2A, Guardian present. Drummond Isaiah T., Seat 2, B Flag Priority Alpha. Drummond Family Trust. Contact Northstar Corporate Relations if incident occurs. Do not separate. Do not escalate without supervisor authorization. James read it twice. He had been flying with Northstar for 4 years, had seen dozens of passenger flags. In that time, medical alerts, frequent flyer statuses, unaccompanied minor protocols, VIP designations for the occasional celebrity or government official. But Priority Alpha was a classification he had never encountered on a domestic flight. It sat in a different tier from the standard codes, the kind of designation that implied something beyond the usual chain of authority, something that touched the corporate level rather than the operational one. He didn't know what Drummond Family Trust meant, but he understood that Priority Alpha combined with a corporate contact instruction meant that whoever was in 2A and 2B was not someone to be handled carelessly. He walked forward to find Brianna. She was in the galley arranging the service cart with the efficient movements of someone who has done this so many times. The body does it without consulting the brain. And she didn't look up when James appeared in the galley doorway. "Brianna, I need to show you something on the manifest seat." 2. A has a priority alpha flag, and I've never actually James. She said his name the way a teacher says a student's name when they're explaining something for the second time. The manifest is my responsibility. Focus on your economy prep. I know, but the flag is... Drop it. She looked up now, and her expression was the expression of someone exercising a kind of authority they are accustomed to exercising without question. I've reviewed the manifest. Whatever is in 2A is already handled. Go. James held her gaze for a moment, then stepped back. He didn't argue. He had learned over 4 years at Northstar that arguing with Brianna Cole in the galley was an exercise that cost more than it returned, and he had complaints filed with HR to prove it. Complaints about exactly this kind of interaction filed through the proper channels, acknowledged with a form letter, and then, as far as he could tell, placed very carefully in a drawer that no one ever opened. He pulled out his personal phone and opened his notes app. He typed, Flight 1847. 10:47 a.m., Seat 2A Priority Alpha Flag. Brought to B. Cole's attention. Response dismissal. Noting for record. He had a file on his phone with 26 entries just like this one. He kept it because he had learned that the only things that couldn't be dismissed were the ones that had been written down before anyone thought they mattered. Back in the cabin, beverage service had begun, and Brianna was working the cart from the front with the smooth attentiveness she brought to first class, remembering preferences without asking, producing the right drink for the right passenger with the practiced ease of someone who understood that this level of service was also a kind of performance. One that said to its audience, "You are seen, you are known, you matter here." She gave this performance to every row except one. When the cart reached 2A and 2B, a junior attendant named Sandra appeared in its place, a young woman who had been working domestic routes for 8 months and had clearly been given the row by Brianna, with a minimum of instruction, and Sandra set 2 glasses of water on the tray tables without eye contact or conversation, and moved on. Isaiah looked at the water. He had not ordered water. He had not been offered anything else. He pressed the call button. 10 minutes passed. Sandra came by, once glanced at the illuminated button, and found something that needed attention in the galley. Brianna passed twice without breaking stride. James was the one who appeared at their row, and he arrived with the slightly apologetic expression of a man who knows the delay has nothing to do with him but is embarrassed by it anyway. "Can I get you something to drink? Sir, coffee, please," Isaiah said. "Black. And apple juice for my daughter if you have it." "Coming right up," James said, and he was back in less than 3 minutes, placing the coffee on Isaiah's tray with a small cloth napkin folded underneath it, setting the apple juice in front of Nadia with a straw already in it. From the galley, just loud enough to carry Brianna's voice, not quite directed at anyone, not quite directed at no one. Some passengers treat first class like it's a personality instead of a ticket. Across the aisle, Thomas Aldridge lowered his newspaper and looked at Isaiah over the folded top edge. He did not speak. He did not need to. The look said everything that would have taken words too long to say. If you've ever witnessed a moment where someone was made to feel invisible in a place, they had every right to be, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, because this story is only getting started, and the man in seat 2B is about to show everyone on that plane exactly who he is. Meal service in first class on Northstar Flight 1847 was, by the airline's own published standards, meant to be a curated experience, a thing the marketing materials described with the phrase elevated dining at altitude, which was a way of saying that the chicken was plated rather than foiled, and that someone would describe it to you before handing it over. Brianna described it to everyone. She described it to Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield with the enthusiasm of a restaurant owner presenting a dish she was personally proud of, talking through the herb sauce on the chicken, the provenance of the wine pairings, the way the pasta had been reformulated 2 months ago after passenger feedback had indicated the previous version lacked depth. She described it to the man in 3C, to the woman in 4B, to Thomas Aldridge across the aisle with the respectful efficiency she applied to passengers who projected the particular authority of someone accustomed to being served well. When she reached 2A and 2B, she stopped the cart and looked at Isaiah with the expression of someone who has already decided this transaction will be brief. "Chicken or pasta?" she said. Isaiah looked up from his phone. "Could you describe the options?" "My daughter has a dairy sensitivity, so I need to know what's in the sauce." Brianna's expression shifted by a fraction, not enough to name, just enough to notice. "It's just a regular sauce," she said. "If you have special dietary needs, you should have flagged them when you booked." "I'm flagging them now," Isaiah said, keeping his voice even and pleasant in the way that takes practice to maintain. "Is the pasta sauce cream-based?" "It's just sauce." Brianna reached for the next cart position. James appeared at Isaiah's elbow as if he had been waiting in exactly the right spot, which Isaiah suspected he had been. He was carrying the actual printed menu card, and he set it on the tray table before Brianna could move the cart forward. "The chicken comes with a lemon and herb sauce." "No dairy," James said quietly, addressing Isaiah directly. "The pasta is a sun-dried tomato cream. The cream is real, so if there's a dairy sensitivity, chicken is the safer option." "Chicken for both of us," Isaiah said. "Thank you, James." Brianna moved the cart forward without acknowledging the exchange. They ate. The chicken was genuinely good, better than Isaiah had expected, better than the rest of the morning had led him to anticipate anything on this flight being, and Nadia ate her portion with the methodical focus she applied to food. She approved of working from the edges toward the center, the way Renee used to do, a habit she had acquired without knowing where it came from. Isaiah was reviewing acquisition documents on his laptop projections for the first quarter post announcement, a draft of the public statement Raymond had prepared, when Brianna passed their row on her way back from the front galley. The aisle was narrow. There was space to pass without incident. The space was not used. Her elbow caught the edge of his tray table with a bump that sent his coffee cup sideways and across the open laptop in a single unhurried arc, the way liquid moves when no one is trying to stop it. The coffee covered the keyboard. The screen flickered twice, went to a bright white, and died. "Oh," Brianna said in the tone of someone who has dropped a paperclip. "Let me get you some napkins." She returned with napkins. She handed them over without apology, without eye contact, without a single word that acknowledged the object now sitting dark and dripping on Isaiah's tray table contained 3 weeks of acquisition strategy that he would need to have his assistant reconstruct from email backups. "Thank you," Isaiah said, because he had been practicing this particular patience his entire adult life. Nadia was watching him with the clear, unfiltered gaze of a child who has not yet learned to edit what her face shows. "Daddy," she said, her voice carrying the quiet precision of someone stating an observable fact that lady keeps making things harder for us. From 3A. Thomas Aldridge set down his napkin and spoke directly to Brianna's retreating back, his voice carrying the unhurried authority of a man who has spent decades in rooms where his opinion carried weight. "Excuse me. I've been watching your service for the last hour, and I would like to understand why 2 of your passengers have received a demonstrably different quality of attention than everyone else in this cabin." Brianna turned, and her smile was the smile of someone who has been trained to smile at exactly this kind of challenge. "Sir, I assure you that every passenger in first class receives the same level." "They do not," Thomas said simply and without anger. "I have eyes, young lady, and I am using them." Brianna retreated to the galley without finishing her sentence. An hour into the flight, Isaiah excused himself from his seat with the straightforward purpose of using the lavatory, which was located 12 feet forward of his seat in the first-class section, and which showed a green vacant indicator on its door panel, as clearly as a traffic light shows green. There was no ambiguity, no room for misreading, no possible honest interpretation of the door panel that would lead a person to conclude the lavatory was anything other than available. Brianna intercepted him 6 feet from the door. "The forward lavatory is currently out of service," she said, stepping into the aisle with the planted stance of someone establishing territory. "You'll want to use the ones in economy there toward the rear of the aircraft." Isaiah looked past her at the green vacant light, which continued to display its green vacant light without apparent concern for the information Brianna was conveying. "The indicator shows it's available," he said. "It's out of service," she repeated in the tone of someone who understands that repeating an assertion with greater confidence is a form of evidence. "For cleaning. There's no cleaning indicator on the panel," Isaiah said, keeping his voice the same temperature it had been all morning. "Not warm, not cold. Just level the particular register of a man who has decided that whatever this costs him emotionally, he will not pay it visibly." Brianna's jaw tightened by a fraction. "Sir, if you'd like to speak with me about the service on this flight, I encourage you to... I'd like to use the lavatory," Isaiah said. From behind Brianna, James Okafor appeared from the forward galley with the quietly decisive movement of someone who has made a decision he knows will cost him something. "The forward lavatory is fully operational, sir," he said, and stepped around Brianna to hold it open with one hand, the panel light green and unambiguous above him. Brianna said nothing. She turned and walked back toward the galley with the rigid posture of someone exercising tremendous restraint, and Isaiah was close enough to see the look she turned on James before she disappeared behind the curtain. A look that was not professional disapproval, but something with more heat in it. A look that said, "You will pay for this." James met the look without flinching and without looking away, and then turned back to Isaiah with a small nod and let him pass. Inside the lavatory, Isaiah ran cold water over his wrists and looked at himself in the small mirror for a long moment. He was not angry, or rather he was angry the way a person is angry when they have been angry so many times in so many versions of this same room that the anger has become something more like information, something the body registers and notes and files, the way a navigator notes a familiar rock formation without needing to be surprised by it. He dried his hands on the paper towel and stood with his back against the door for exactly 5 seconds, doing nothing, which was the amount of time he had learned to give himself in these moments, before walking back out into the world as if none of it had happened. When he returned to his seat, Nadia had made a new friend. She was turned toward the aisle, holding Pepper up for Thomas Aldridge's inspection, explaining the elephant's history in the thorough manner she applied to subjects she considered important, and Thomas was listening with the full attention of a man who understood that being taken seriously by a 6-year-old was a privilege and not a burden. He looked up when Isaiah settled back into 2B, and he extended his hand across the aisle. "Thomas Aldridge," he said, "retired federal judge. I want you to know that I've been watching everything that's happened on this flight, and I intend to say so to anyone who asks." Isaiah shook his hand. "Isaiah Drummond," he said. "I appreciate that more than you know." Isaiah's phone buzzed twice in the hour that followed both times. Raymond, both times increasingly urgent in the particular way Raymond expressed urgency, which was through careful understatement and a noticeable shortening of his sentences. First message: acquisition confirmed leaked to 2 board members and at least 1 department head. Northstar staff may have been informed. Advise on announcement timing. Second message: videos from 1847 circulating on social media. Passengers filming. Our communications team asking for direction. Please respond. Isaiah read both messages, put the phone away, and looked out the window at the flat blue sky above the clouds, and thought about what it meant that videos from this flight were already circulating, while the flight was still in the air, while Brianna was still in the galley, while he was still sitting in 2B, watching the service that he now owned being delivered to the people around him. He thought about the 23 complaint files Raymond had sent him 3 days after the acquisition closed, 23 documented grievances from passengers of color filed against Northstar crew over the previous 18 months, all processed through the official complaint channel, all acknowledged with the same form letter, all closed without any record of action taken. He had read every one of them. He had noted the patterns in them. He had not yet done anything about the patterns in them because he had wanted first to see whether the patterns were real or whether they were the kind of thing that looks like a pattern in documents but dissolves when you stand inside it. He was standing inside it now. The white woman in 5C had been watching the row ahead of hers, watching Isaiah, watching Nadia, watching the way Brianna's body language changed depending on whose tray she was standing next to for the better part of 30 minutes. And when Brianna passed through the cabin again, she raised her hand and asked whether it might be possible to move to a different seat. She did not explain why. She did not need to explain why. Brianna moved her to 1A without asking any of the questions she had asked Isaiah 3 hours ago, without hesitation, without the exaggerated scrutiny she had applied to Isaiah's boarding passes, without any of the friction she had produced in 2B simply by arriving. Nadia watched this happen with her chin resting on Pepper's head. Then she turned to Isaiah. "Is it because of us?" she asked. The question was simple and direct, the way children's questions about hard things always are landing without the cushioning that adults have learned to apply to the same observations when they make them. Yes, Isaiah said, because he had decided after Renee died that he would not raise their daughter to explain away what she could clearly see. Some people decide they don't want to be near us because of how we look, and that's wrong, and it's also something that happens, and both of those things are true at the same time. Nadia absorbed this with the focused stillness she brought to information she was integrating rather than merely receiving. She looked at Pepper. She looked out the window. She said, "Mama used to say our color is like the earth." "She did," Isaiah said. "Rich and full of life," Nadia said, which was the rest of the sentence, the part Renee used to add, and she said it with the cadence of someone reciting something they intend never to forget. Thomas across the aisle had heard this exchange, and his expression in the moment after was not pity. It was something more complicated than pity, something that lived in the territory between admiration and grief, and he turned back to his newspaper without saying anything, because there was nothing to say that the moment hadn't already said better. James passed their row with a small tray, not part of any service cycle, not requested, not announced, and set a fresh apple juice in front of Nadia and a bottle of still water in front of Isaiah, and kept walking without making anything of it. Just a person doing something kind because he had decided to do something kind, and no other reason and no performance required. Isaiah looked at the water bottle. He looked at the back of James's head as the young man continued up the aisle. He thought about the 23 complaint files. He thought about the form letters. He thought about what it would mean to be James Okafor, to see these things clearly enough to act on them in small and quiet ways every single flight, knowing that the forms went into a drawer that nobody opened. He picked up the water bottle and took a long drink, and outside the window the clouds shifted and the light changed, and the flight continued south to northeast at 37,000 feet, carrying its full cargo of things, said and unsaid. The turbulence came without warning, the way turbulence always does at altitude. One moment the air was smooth and the engines were doing their low, even work, and the cabin had the particular suspended quality of a room in which nothing is about to change. And then the plane dropped and caught and shuddered, and the overhead bins rattled with the sound of bags shifting, and a half-full juice glass in the galley tipped into something metal with a clang that carried all the way to the front row. The seatbelt sign came on with its 2-note chime. Nadia grabbed Isaiah's arm with both hands. Pepper crushed between her chest and his sleeve and her breathing. Isaiah heard it change before he felt it, the way you hear a sound before you identify it. The faint constriction in the inhale that meant the anxiety was becoming physical, that the stress of the day and the sudden violence of the turbulence were combining in her chest the way they had combined before in doctors' offices and on the night of Renee's funeral, and twice in the car on the way home from school. Her breathing was tightening, and he recognized it the way only a parent recognizes it, by sound, and by the way her shoulder felt under his hand when he put it there. "I need her inhaler," he said to himself first, already reaching, already assessing where the bag was under the seat in front of 2A, where he had stowed it during boarding within arm's reach, if the seatbelt allowed him to lean far enough forward. He was leaning forward when Brianna appeared. "Sir?" Her voice was already at command volume, already operating from the assumption that whatever was happening in 2A was a problem of compliance rather than a problem of a child's lungs. "The seatbelt sign is illuminated. Please return to the upright position and keep your belt fastened. My daughter is having an asthma episode," Isaiah said, his hand still reaching for the bag, his voice stripped of everything except the bare functional information she needed to make the right choice. "I need to give her inhaler. It's in the bag under the seat." Brianna's posture did not change. "There are protocols during turbulence. She cannot breathe." He said it the way you say something that is both a statement of fact and a plea, the two things occupying the same syllables. "I need 30 seconds. James had already come from the galley at a pace that wasn't quite running, but was everything running would have been without the panic. He dropped to one knee in the aisle, reached under the seat in front of 2A with the practiced efficiency of someone who had decided that being efficient right now mattered more than anything else, and pulled the bag out and handed it to Isaiah in one motion. "Thank you," Isaiah said, unzipping the front pocket, finding the inhaler by feel, the way he had learned to find it in the dark in the middle of the night in every other version of this moment they had lived through together since Renee stopped being there to do it with him. Nadia took the inhaler with the practiced compliance of a child who has done this enough times to know the drill. 2 puffs. Slow. Breath. Hold. And Isaiah held her through it, his hand on her back, counting in his head, the way her pediatrician had shown him. And the cabin turbulence continued, and the overhead bins continued, their rattling, and the seatbelt light continued its illuminated instruction, and none of that mattered as much as the sound of his daughter's breathing, slowly, gradually, with the measured reluctance of a closing door returning to normal. Brianna had not moved. She stood in the aisle with her arms at her sides, watching, and her expression was the expression of someone who is committed to a position and is now waiting for the situation to conform to it, rather than updating the position to conform to the situation. Thomas Aldridge's voice came from 3A, measured and cold. What possible protocol requires a child to struggle to breathe while her father is prevented from helping her? Several passengers shifted. Several phones that had been pointed discreetly at the aisle now lifted to more deliberate angles. "There are safety procedures," Brianna began. "I've heard about the procedures," Thomas said. "I haven't heard an answer." Brianna retreated toward the forward galley without answering, and the turbulence eased to a gentle rocking, and the seatbelt light stayed on, and Nadia's breathing continued its slow return to normal, and Isaiah kept his hand on her back and counted until he was sure. When Nadia could speak again, small-voiced, still leaning into him, Pepper held flat against her chest. She looked up at him and said, "Why did she stop you, Daddy?" The question filled the cabin the way small sounds fill large spaces, not loudly but completely occupying every available inch of silence until there was no room left for anything else. Isaiah looked at his daughter's face, the earnest, dark eyes, the slight furrow between her brows that she had inherited directly and without modification from her mother, and he did not have an answer that was both true and bearable for a 6-year-old to carry. So he said, "I don't know, baby," which was the truest thing available to him in that moment. The plane flew on. The clouds moved. Nobody in the first-class cabin spoke for a long time. In the forward galley behind the curtain that separated the crew space from the first-class cabin, the argument between Brianna Cole and James Okafor was conducted in the tight, compressed whisper of two people who understood that the wall between them and the passengers was fabric and not concrete. James had the manifest open on his tablet. He turned it toward Brianna and pointed to line 17 with one finger, keeping his voice as level as he could keep it, which was not very level. "Priority Alpha," he said. "Drummond Family Trust, Northstar Corporate Relations contact if incident occurs. Do you know what Priority Alpha is? Because I've flown 4 years with this airline and I have never seen it on a domestic route." Brianna looked at the tablet with the expression of someone who is deciding whether to read something or decide they have already read it. She chose the latter. "It's a booking classification. It doesn't change protocols." "It changes how we handle situations involving this passenger," James said. "That's literally what it says. Do not escalate without supervisor authorization." You just escalated. Twice. I was managing a safety situation during turbulence. You stopped a father from giving his 6-year-old her asthma inhaler. James kept his voice very low and very clear, the way you keep a voice when you want the words to land without any noise around them to absorb the impact. "I watched you do it. There are 15 people in that cabin who watched you do it, and at least 7 of them are filming." Brianna set down the beverage cart handle with a small, decisive sound. "James, I have been lead flight attendant on this route for 9 years. I understand my passengers and I understand this cabin, and I will not be questioned on protocol by a first-year attendant who decided to play hero with the overhead bag." She straightened her uniform jacket. "If you report this, I will note your insubordination, and I will note that you removed a bag from under a passenger seat during active turbulence in violation of safety regulations. Do you want to have that conversation with the Chief Operations Office?" James looked at her for a moment. Then he took out his personal phone and opened his notes app, and he typed while she watched him do it, and he saved it, and he put the phone back in his pocket. "I'm documenting this conversation," he said. "I'm going to keep documenting, that's all." Brianna walked back into the cabin. James stood in the galley for a moment, breathing slowly, then picked up the interphone and called the economy section to check on his colleagues there. While he was on the call, a notification appeared on the galley-mounted tablet, a news push from a travel industry site, a short breaking story with a headline that read, "Northstar Airlines, new majority owner, reportedly aboard Flight 1847 sources, say acquisition of carrier was finalized 3 weeks ago." Below the headline was a photograph, an old photo, slightly blurry, taken at a tech conference 3 years ago. It showed a white man in his mid-50s, silver-haired, wearing a Northstar lanyard. The man in the photo was Richard Peterson. Richard Peterson was seated in 4C2 rows behind Isaiah Drummond, and had been for the last 3 hours. Brianna read the article. She looked at the photograph. She looked through the curtain gap toward 4C, where Richard Peterson was reviewing documents on his laptop with the undisturbed concentration of a man who does not know he is being watched. She looked at the photograph again. Something in her posture shifted a small recalibration, the physical adjustment of a person updating their understanding of a situation, and she put the tablet down and walked back into the cabin. What followed was a performance so abrupt in its reversal that it would have been almost comic if the circumstances that preceded it had been anything other than what they were. Brianna appeared beside Peterson in 4C with a warmth that had been absent from her face all morning, asking if he needed anything refreshing. His water inquiring about the document he was reading, with the practiced interest she had deployed all morning on the Whitfields and Thomas Aldridge, and everyone in the cabin except the row she now understood incorrectly and completely to not matter. Isaiah watched this from 2B. He understood what had happened, not the specific misidentification, but the general mechanism, the idea that a flag had been seen and someone on this crew had now decided that the VIP requiring careful treatment was elsewhere in the cabin, which left row 2 as free of consequence as it had been all morning. He checked his phone. Raymond, again videos at 2.4 million views. Board emergency session convened. Need direction. Also, Peterson has been calling the comms office asking if he's been identified as the owner. He is extremely confused. Isaiah set the phone face down on his tray table and looked out the window at the solid blue above the clouds and let himself feel for exactly one moment the particular dark humor of the situation. The owner of the airline watching someone believe the owner of the airline was sitting 2 rows behind him while continuing to treat the actual owner of the airline with the same casual contempt she had been delivering all morning. Then the turbulence returned. The second round of turbulence was different from the first, not a drop and a catch, but a sustained shaking of violence in the air that set the overhead bins rattling continuously and caused something in the economy section to crash, and a passenger somewhere behind the curtain to cry out with the involuntary sound of genuine fear. The captain's voice came on. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're encountering significant turbulence and ask that everyone remain seated with seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants, please secure yourselves immediately." Nadia grabbed Isaiah's arm before he could reach for her. Her face had gone white beneath its warmth, her eyes wide, and he could hear it already. The constriction, the faint dry labor in her breath that meant the anxiety was climbing faster than the turbulence could account for. That the day's accumulated weight, the cold looks, the denied service, the stopped inhaler, the morning of being treated like an intrusion had used up the reserves that would otherwise have kept this from happening. "Daddy," she started. "I know," he said. "I know, baby. I've got it." He reached for the bag. It was under the seat in front of 2A, where James had replaced it after the first episode, and he had to lean forward against the seatbelt to reach it, the turbulence working against him. The plane shuddering with the irregular rhythm of disturbed air, and he had his hand on the bag's outer pocket when Brianna appeared. She had not secured herself. She was standing in the first-class aisle during active turbulence with her hands at her sides and her eyes on 2A, and whatever had driven her to the aisle during a captain's instruction to secure herself was a thing that lived below the level of professional calculation in some older, more unguarded part of her. "Sir." Her voice was loud, loud enough for the whole cabin to hear, loud enough to be the voice of authority performing itself rather than exercising itself. "Sir, you need to keep your hands visible and return to your seat immediately." Isaiah's hand was on the bag. His daughter was wheezing beside him, the sound of it now audible to anyone close enough to listen. "She needs her inhaler," he said. "This is a medical emergency. You were here for the first one. I need to see what you're reaching for." Brianna stepped forward 2 steps into the narrow aisle space and reached for his hand. The inhaler came out with the motion of his pulling back from her grip. It flew from his fingers and hit the carpet and slid, skidding forward under the momentum of the plane's shuddering disappearing under the seat in row 4 with the terrible arbitrariness of small objects going where no one needs them to go. No. The word came out of Isaiah stripped of everything. Not anger, not calculation, not the careful register he had maintained all morning, just the raw sound of a father watching the thing. His daughter needed slide away from him. He unbuckled. "Sir, remain in your seat." Brianna moved to put herself between him and the inhaler, her body in the aisle, her voice still performing its authority, and Thomas Aldridge stood up across the aisle without hesitation, unbuckling despite the turbulence, despite the captain's instruction, because some instructions are superseded by what is right in front of you. James was already moving. He had heard it from the galley, not the words but the sound of the inhaler hitting the carpet, a sound he recognized from the first episode, and he was in the aisle before Brianna had finished her sentence on his knees in row 4, his hand under the seat, pulling the inhaler out with the focused efficiency of someone who has decided that this one thing will not take 1 second longer than it has to. He placed it in Isaiah's hand. Isaiah turned to Nadia. She was hunched forward in her seat, both hands gripping the armrest, her breath audible now to the passengers in the 2 rows on either side of them, the thin, labored sound of airways, tightening the sound that never becomes ordinary, no matter how many times a parent hears it. He administered the inhaler, 2 puffs, his hand steady on her back. Breathe, breathe, hold, let it go. The plane shook around them and the overhead bins rattled, and somewhere behind the curtain a flight attendant was reading emergency instructions, and none of it touched the small, complete world of the two of them in seats 2A and 2B. Nadia's breathing slowed. It did not recover all at once. It came back in stages, the way light comes back after something bright has passed gradually and then fully. And when she finally leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes and took a long, clean breath, Isaiah exhaled a breath he had been holding since the turbulence started. The young black woman in 3D she had been recording since the lavatory incident, her phone angled with the quiet deliberateness of someone who understood that what she was capturing was not content, but evidence lowered her phone to a less conspicuous position and said in a voice that carried clearly through the first-class section, "He's her father." She couldn't breathe. "What exactly did you think was threatening?" Brianna stood in the aisle. The turbulence had eased to a gentle roll. The overhead bins had stopped rattling. The cabin was very still in the way it is still after something has happened in it that cannot be undone. Thomas sat back down slowly, his eyes on Brianna, and he did not look away. Nadia's voice came from against Isaiah's shoulder, small and exhausted and very precise. "Why did she stop you, Daddy?" The whole cabin heard it. Nobody answered. Isaiah asked to speak with the captain. He did not raise his voice. He did not stand. He said it the way you say something when you have decided that all the alternatives have been tried, and this is what comes next plainly to James, who was checking on Nadia with a cup of water, and a gentleness that had nothing professional about it, just a man being decent to a child who had been through something hard. "I'd like to speak with the captain," Isaiah said. "Formally, please. By name, if you have it." "Captain Darnell Reeves," James said, and he held Isaiah's gaze for a moment before standing. "I'll go now." Brianna had heard this from 3 rows forward, where she was occupying herself with a magazine rack that did not need reorganizing. She turned. "The captain is managing active flight operations. Passenger requests go through the lead attendant, which is—" "I'd like to speak with the captain," Isaiah said again in the exact same tone to James. James walked to the cockpit door. He knocked. He spoke briefly through the interphone panel. He turned back to the cabin. "The captain will be available in approximately 10 minutes, sir." Brianna moved toward Isaiah's row while James was at the cockpit, and her demeanor had changed, not dramatically, not in the way that would be visible to someone who hadn't been watching all morning, but the edge was gone from it, replaced by something else. Something smoother and more dangerous. The register of someone managing a situation they have begun to sense is shifting beneath them. She stopped beside 2B and lowered her voice. "Mr. Drummond, I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot this morning, and if there's been any misunderstanding in the service you've received, I'd like to—" "There wasn't a misunderstanding," Isaiah said. Brianna blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "You understood exactly what you were doing," Isaiah said in the same quiet, even voice he had been using all morning. "Every decision you made today was a decision. The coffee, the lavatory, the inhaler." He looked at her. There was no misunderstanding. Brianna's face passed through several expressions in quick succession, the professional mask reassembling over something that was not professional. Something that lived closer to the surface than she wanted it to. Something that had been sitting behind all the day's careful management waiting. "I was doing my job," she said, and her voice had lost its smoothness, now had gone tight with the particular brittleness of a person who has been told plainly that the story they have been telling about themselves is not the story that was visible to everyone around them. "Your job involves making sure my daughter can breathe," Isaiah said. Brianna's hand moved before she completed the thought behind it. The slap landed on Isaiah's left cheek with a sound that cut through the first-class cabin like a crack in glass. Sharp, definitive, impossible to mishear or misinterpret, and for exactly 2 seconds the entire cabin froze in the particular way that moments of genuine shock freeze the people who witness them all. Motion suspended, all sound absorbed, everyone converted temporarily from passengers into witnesses. Isaiah did not move. He sat perfectly still, his hands in his lap, and raised his right hand slowly to his cheek, touching it with 2 fingers, the way you touch something to confirm it's real. And as his hand came down from his cheek, the overhead cabin light, soft, indirect the warm amber of first-class lighting, caught the signet ring on his right hand. The Northstar star. Dark gold, etched clean and unmistakable. Brianna's eyes found it. The color left her face. Not quickly, not the way color leaves a face in movies, a sudden drain, a single moment of transition, but in stages, in the slow, terrible way that understanding arrives, when understanding is the worst possible thing that could arrive, moving through her expression like weather moving through a sky. First from the high points, and then from everywhere else, until what remained was something pale and very still and completely unable to look away from the ring. She had worked for Northstar Airlines for 15 years. She had attended the mandatory company briefings when the new branding rolled out 4 years ago. The new uniforms, the new logo, the new star on the tail of every aircraft in the fleet. The same star that appeared on every boarding pass on every napkin in the first-class galley, on the buckle of every crew ID lanyard, on the face of the signet ring presented to senior executives and board members and the new owner of Northstar Airlines upon the finalization of a very quiet acquisition 3 weeks ago. She knew exactly what she was looking at. The silence stretched from Isaiah's row outward through the cabin like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. First the passengers in rows 1 and 2, then 3 and 4, then further back heads turning, the people who had not seen the slap turning toward the people who had, everyone recalibrating. Isaiah lowered his hand from his cheek. He did not look at Brianna with anger. He did not look at her with triumph. He looked at her with the particular expression of a man who has already decided what comes next and does not need this moment to perform anything for him. An expression that was somehow more devastating than anger would have been, because anger can be argued with and this could not. "This will be the last flight you ever work," he said. Quietly. Factually. With the weight of a man who owns the sentence he is speaking. Then he turned away from her. He turned to Nadia, who had woken from the shallow half-sleep the medication had pulled her into, and was looking up at him with eyes that were still slightly clouded with exhaustion, and he cupped her face in both hands, his signet ring warm against her cheek, and looked at her the way you look at someone you nearly lost. "Daddy's right here," he said. "Everything's okay." "Is the lady still there?" Nadia asked. "No," Isaiah said, which was true in every way that mattered. Behind him, Brianna had not moved. She stood in the aisle with her hand still hovering at the height it had been when it struck him, and around her the cabin was producing the particular sound of collective reckoning. The murmurs, the turning toward neighbors, the furious typing into phones, the low voices of people narrating what they had just seen to the people in their lives who were not there to see it, which was millions of people, because the videos had been uploading to the internet since before the laptop coffee, and there were now 14 separate recordings of the first-class section of Northstar Flight 1847 from Atlanta to New York, and every single one of them was about to show the same gold star, catching the same amber light. Thomas Aldridge from 3A said nothing. He looked at Brianna for a long moment, and then he looked at Isaiah's back. And then he looked at his hands folded in his lap, and his expression was not satisfaction. It was something older and heavier and more complicated than satisfaction. The expression of a man who has lived long enough to stop being surprised by things that should not still be surprising. Captain Darnell Reeves emerged from the cockpit at the moment the second officer could hold the flight deck, which was approximately 90 seconds after James had relayed Isaiah's request, and approximately 40 seconds after the sound of the slap had reached the cockpit door, a sound which the captain had heard muffled by the door, but unmistakable, and which had moved him from his seat with the decisiveness of a man who has been flying commercial aviation for 22 years and understands that some sounds require an immediate response, regardless of what the door between you and them is made of. He was tall, composed, with the particular stillness of someone who manages emergencies for a living. Not calm, exactly, but calibrated, the way instruments are calibrated, reliable under conditions that would destabilize less careful things. He assessed the scene in the first-class cabin in approximately 3 seconds. Brianna still standing in the aisle, her professional composure reassembled over something that was not composure. Isaiah in 2B with his daughter, his cheek carrying a mark that was visible from the galley. The phones. The silence. "Mr. Drummond," he said, and the sound of Isaiah's name in the captain's voice sent a second ripple through the cabin because it told every passenger who had been wondering whether their understanding of the situation was correct that their understanding was correct. Captain Reeves Isaiah said. He had not stood. He kept his hand over Nadia's. "Would you come forward, sir, with your daughter if she's comfortable?" In the cockpit jump seat with the first officer occupying the flight deck and the door closed behind them, Captain Reeves sat across from Isaiah and held Nadia's steady gaze for a moment before he spoke. "I was notified 40 minutes ago. He said that Northstar's new majority owner might be aboard this flight. The name I was given was Peterson. I assumed the information was correct." He paused. "It was not correct." "No," Isaiah said. "It was not." Reeves ran a hand along his jaw. "I want to be straightforward with you, Mr. Drummond. I've been with Northstar for 22 years, and I have flown with Brianna Cole on 47 routes in the past 4 years, and I have received 3 passenger complaints about her service in that time, all of which were filed through the standard channels." He stopped. "I have never been told what happened to those complaints. I know what happened to them," Isaiah said. "Nothing. I've read the files." Reeves absorbed this. His expression did not perform surprise, which told Isaiah that the absence of surprise was genuine. The expression of a man who had suspected a thing for a long time and was now being told the thing he suspected was true. "The inhaler," Isaiah said. "I need you to understand that piece specifically." She was aware my daughter needed medical attention. She made a choice. Reeves did not look away. "I understand. And I want you to know," Isaiah continued, his voice still level, still carrying the same register it had carried all morning, "that this flight, this specific experience from check-in to right now is what your passengers experience when they board this airline, and nobody with authority is watching. That's what I came to find out. And now I know." Reeves was quiet for a moment. The flight deck hummed with the sounds of cruising altitude, the instruments doing their quiet and reliable work. Then he said, "What can I do right now on this flight?" Isaiah thought about it. "Tell James he did the right thing every time he chose to do the right thing today, and then let me speak to the cabin." Reeves nodded. "I'll set it up." Nadia, who had been sitting on Isaiah's lap with Pepper held against her chest and her eyes moving between the 2 men with the alert processing attention she brought to adult conversations, she had decided mattered, looked at the captain with the directness she had inherited from Renee. "Is the lady going to be on any more planes?" she asked. Reeves looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not professional at all. Just a human face responding to a 6-year-old's completely reasonable question. "No, Miss Drummond," he said. "She is not." Nadia nodded, apparently satisfied, and tucked Pepper under her chin. James came back into the first-class cabin after his conversation with the captain with the particular quality of composure that belongs to someone who has just been told for the first time that the thing they did was both right and seen that the 27 entries in their notes app and the 4 years of doing quiet, decent things in an environment that did not reward them had been witnessed by someone who had the capacity to do something about what they witnessed. He moved through the cabin without speaking, checking on passengers with the attentiveness he had maintained all morning, the consistency of his decency, a kind of argument by itself against everything that had happened in the rows around 2B. Thomas Aldrich called him over with a gentle lift of one hand. "Son," he said, because Thomas Aldrich called young men son when he meant it, and never when he didn't. "In 82 years of living in this country, I have seen a great many people make the easy choice when the easy choice was the wrong one." He held James's eyes. "You did not do that today. Not once." James said thank you in the voice of someone who has been holding something heavier than they expected and has just been allowed to set it down briefly. The young black woman in 3D, Valerie, though no one in the cabin had asked her name yet, had been recording since the lavatory incident. Her phone angled with the quiet, purposeful precision of someone who understood the difference between taking video for the internet and taking video for the record. She had 19 minutes of footage. She was not uploading it. She was keeping it the way you keep something that belongs to a story still being written. She watched Brianna, who had been escorted by the second officer to the forward jump seat, and was sitting there with her hands folded in her lap and the expression of someone whose understanding of their situation is arriving in waves, each wave bringing more of the picture into focus, each wave slightly colder than the last. Richard Peterson, in 4C, had removed his earphones when the slap happened and had not replaced them. He was a board member at Northstar, one of the people Raymond had warned about, one of the people who had received second-hand word of the acquisition through channels that were not supposed to exist. And he understood now with a clarity that had been building since the captain said the name Mr. Drummond aloud that the man he had been watching receive indignity after indignity for 3 hours in the row ahead of him was the man who owned the airline they were both currently flying on. He was not proud of his 3 hours of silence. He did not expect to be forgiven for it. He was at least honest enough with himself to know that this counted for nothing. The white businessman in 5A, who had said nothing during the lavatory gambit or the first inhaler incident or the coffee spill, leaned forward in his seat and tapped the arm of the woman in 5B, his wife from their earlier conversation, and said very quietly, "I should have said something." His wife looked at him. She did not answer, but her not answering was its own answer, and he leaned back in his seat and stared at the headrest in front of him. Several passengers were writing on the backs of their boarding passes and napkins, not notes for social media, but the kind of notes people write when they want to have the words right, when they are asked for them formally in an official context by someone whose job it is to take statements. Valerie noted this and found it interesting. She had never seen passengers in the middle of a flight compose formal witness statements on airline napkins before. She thought about what it meant that these particular passengers in this particular cabin on this particular morning had decided to do that. Nadia had fallen back into the shallow medication-assisted sleep that the inhaler always brought after an episode still in her seat. Pepper held loosely against her chest, her face in sleep carrying no trace of the morning's weight, only the uncomplicated features of a 6-year-old who has been through something difficult and whose body has decided wisely to rest. Isaiah sat beside her and watched the clouds through the window and thought about the 23 complaint files and the form letters and the 4 years of James Okafor writing entries in a notes app that nobody in authority had ever asked to see. And he thought about what it means to build something and not know what it looks like from the inside until you stand inside it. Captain Reeves's voice came through the cabin intercom with the particular formality he reserved for non-standard announcements, the slight shift in register that told passengers to stop what they were doing and attend to what was being said. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are approximately 40 minutes from our descent into JFK. At this time, one of our passengers has requested to address the cabin briefly. In the interest of transparency and in recognition of the events that have occurred on this flight, I am honoring that request. Mr. Drummond." The interphone handset was brought to Isaiah's row by James, who also, with quiet foresight, gently touched Nadia's shoulder, before Isaiah stood so that she would not wake to find her father's seat empty beside her. She stirred, registered James's presence, and settled back into sleep with the trust of a child who has decided that the world around her currently contains people she can trust. Isaiah stood. He was not tall in the way that demands attention, but he was present in the way that earns it, the particular quality of a person whose stillness fills whatever space they occupy, not because they are performing it, but because it has become structural part of how they are built. He held the interphone handset and looked along the cabin for a moment before he spoke, taking in the rows of faces turned toward him. First class, and through the open curtain, the economy section beyond heads craned toward the gap. He did not have notes. "My name is Isaiah Drummond," he said. 3 weeks ago, I became the majority owner of Northstar Airlines through a holding company called the Drummond Family Trust. I did not announce that acquisition. I boarded this flight this morning as a regular passenger, a first-class ticket, same as anyone, because I wanted to see what this airline looks like from the inside before anyone had a reason to make it look different because I was watching. A sound moved through the cabin. Not a gasp, not quite, but the exhalation of a large group of people processing information simultaneously, the collective shift of understanding that comes when a story reframes itself. Isaiah waited for it to settle. What I saw today, what my daughter and I experienced from the check-in counter at Hartsfield-Jackson to this cabin from the moment we stepped onto this plane, to the moment a member of this crew put her hand on my face, is what too many passengers experience every time they fly without a single person in a position of authority being obligated to acknowledge it or answer for it. He paused. Not for effect, he was not a man who paused for effect, but because what came next was harder to say and he wanted to say it correctly. My daughter Nadia is 6 years old. She has asthma. She has never been on a plane before today, and what she learned today on what was supposed to be her first experience of flying is that some people in positions of authority will look at her and her father and decide before a single word is exchanged that we are in the wrong place, that we are a problem to be managed rather than passengers to be served, that the professional care and human decency being extended to the rows around us does not extend to our row. The cabin was absolutely still. Economy class behind the curtain had gone quiet in the way a room goes quiet when it understands it is inside something that will be talked about later. I am not telling you this to produce an outcome for this flight. The outcome for this flight is already determined. What I am telling you because I believe you deserve to know it is what I found when I looked at this airline honestly, without the lens of ownership or authority, just a man in a seat with his daughter. He looked along the first-class section. There is a flight attendant on this aircraft whose name is James Okafor. In the last 3 hours, James has brought my daughter apple juice when no one asked him to. He has retrieved information I needed when a colleague chose to withhold it. He has twice placed my daughter's inhaler in my hands when another person made it impossible for me to reach it myself. He did these things quietly, consistently, and without asking for recognition because he understood that his job was to serve every passenger on this aircraft with equal care, and he did his job. Several passengers who had not previously known James's name made the connection now, heads turning toward where he stood at the galley entrance, face composed, hands folded, making no attempt to acknowledge the attention. James will continue to work for Northstar Airlines, Isaiah said. He will in fact play a significant role in what comes next for this carrier. What comes next involves a complete review of every complaint filed against Northstar crew in the last 3 years that was closed without action. It involves changes to how this airline trains its people, how it receives and handles passenger reports, and how it holds itself accountable to the standard it publishes in its marketing materials and has not consistently met in its practice. He looked toward 3A, where Thomas Aldridge sat with his hands folded and his eyes steady. There is a man in this cabin seat, 3A, who is 82 years old, who has spent a significant portion of those 82 years watching this country struggle with its own contradictions, and who chose today multiple times to use his voice when using it would have been easier not to. Mr. Aldridge. Thank you. Thomas gave a single measured nod, the nod of a man receiving acknowledgement rather than praise. And in seat 3D, Isaiah continued, there is a woman who has been documenting this flight with the understanding that what she was capturing was not a moment but a record. Ma'am, I don't know your name, but I would like to. Valerie in 3D looked up from her phone. Valerie, she said to the cabin at large, into the space Isaiah had created for her name to exist in. Valerie, Isaiah said, thank you. He held the interphone for a moment longer. No passenger should ever sit in a seat on this airline and feel what my daughter felt today. No child should learn at 6 years old on their first flight that some people will look at them and decide they don't belong in the room they're standing in. That lesson is a debt, and it is one that I intend to begin repaying starting from the moment this plane lands. He handed the interphone back to James. The applause began in the row behind Thomas Aldridge, the white businessman from 5A who had told his wife he should have said something and who was now somewhat late saying something, and it moved forward and backward through the cabin simultaneously. Not the polite applause of an audience responding to a performance, but the more complicated sound of people who have been witnesses to something and are trying to locate in the available gestures the one that comes closest to what they mean. Nadia slept through it, her face against Pepper's ear, her breathing clean and even and entirely untroubled. Isaiah sat back down beside her and put his hand over hers, and the clouds moved past the window and the plane flew on toward New York, and the afternoon light came through the oval glass at the particular slant of late October. And in the front jump seat, Brianna Cole sat with her hands in her lap, and stared at the floor with the expression of a person whose story about themselves has been revised by the world without her permission. If this story is making you feel something, hit that like button right now and subscribe to our channel, because the moment this plane lands is only the beginning of what Isaiah Drummond is about to do. The descent into New York came with the particular quality of late October afternoons over the Northeast. The light at a low angle, the shadows along the city appearing through the cloud cover as a grid of gray and silver, and the occasional bright rectangle of a rooftop catching the sun. And Isaiah watched it from 2A with Nadia awake now and pressed against the window, her breath fogging the glass in small quick circles as she tried to take in everything below them simultaneously. "Daddy, she said it's so big." "It is," he agreed. "Can you see our hotel?" "Not yet," he said. "Soon." Raymond Osei was waiting at a private exit on the east side of Terminal 4, standing beside a black SUV with the expression of a man who has been managing a crisis for 6 hours and is extremely relieved to see the person most central to that crisis step through a door in one piece. He clocked the mark on Isaiah's cheek before he clocked anything else, and something crossed his face, brief. Unguarded, the expression of a man who takes personal the things that happen to people he is responsible for before his professional composure reassembled. "Are you both?" he began. "We're fine," Isaiah said. "Nadia, this is Raymond. He works with Daddy." Nadia looked at Raymond with the assessing directness of a 6-year-old meeting an adult for the first time. "Do you fly on the airplane too?" she asked. "Sometimes," Raymond said. "Ours was mostly not nice," Nadia reported in the tone of someone providing factual information. "But some parts were nice. James was nice." "I've heard about James," Raymond said, and looked at Isaiah over her head with an expression that contained several things at once. The news vans were visible through the terminal glass. 3 of them satellite dishes raised positioned near the main arrivals exit with the patient readiness of organizations that have been told something is arriving and have decided to be there when it does. Airport security had increased its visible presence around the terminal in the particular way that suggests official awareness of an unofficial situation. Isaiah moved Nadia through the airport with Raymond clearing the path ahead and security flanking at a discreet distance past the gate through the service corridor out through the employee exit that deposited them into the late afternoon light of the pickup area 20 yards from the SUV. As they reached the vehicle, the deplaning passengers from 1847 were still filtering through the main terminal above them, and Isaiah knew that some of them were speaking to reporters. He would see the footage later. The first-hand accounts from witnesses who had decided that what they had seen deserved to be described in public, and he knew that by morning the story would have a shape that it did not currently have a shape, built from all the recordings and all the statements and the particular detail of a gold star on a signet ring catching the overhead light of a first-class cabin. He helped Nadia into the SUV. Thomas Aldridge had insisted on deplaning with the main group, which was his right, and he paused on the jet bridge long enough to find Isaiah before the crowd separated them. He held Isaiah's hand in both of his, the handshake of a man for whom physical contact is a form of deliberate communication, and said only, "Your wife would recognize you in this moment." He did not explain how he knew about Renee, and Isaiah did not ask because some things find their way to the surface without a mechanism you can point to. And Thomas was the kind of man who had lived long enough to know things without always knowing how he knew them. Isaiah held it together until they were through the jet bridge door. Then he stood in the service corridor for exactly 4 seconds, with his hand flat against the cinder block wall, breathing, before Raymond appeared at his shoulder, and the 4 seconds ended, and the rest of it began. The SUV moved through the approach roads of JFK toward the Van Wyck, with the heavy patience of New York airport traffic which operates on geological time, and Nadia fell asleep before they reached the Belt Parkway. Face against the window. Pepper in her lap, the absolute boneless sleep of a small person who has been through more than a small person should have to go through before dinner. Raymond sat across from Isaiah in the rear compartment with his tablet on his knee, and his expression carefully arranged into the version of briefing face that he used when he had difficult information to deliver in a way that was both thorough and humane. Videos, he said. Current count 14 separate recordings, 7 of which are being actively circulated. Total combined views as of 20 minutes ago, 9.3 million. Isaiah looked out the window at the Queens Expressway moving past. Every major network has run the story. 3 international outlets have picked it up. The hashtag, he glanced at his tablet. Northstar is currently the 3rd trending term in the United States. He paused. The board is in emergency session. Peterson has been calling the comms office every 30 minutes to clarify that he is not you. I know, Isaiah said. I watched the misunderstanding happen in real time. He looked at Raymond. Where is Brianna Cole right now? Detained for questioning by Port Authority. HR has been formally notified. Legal is standing by. And James still aboard the return positioning flight. He doesn't know? Raymond paused, rethinking the sentence. He's not fully aware of the scope of what's being said about him publicly. Call his personal number, Isaiah said. Before he lands, I want him to hear from me directly before he reads it somewhere. Raymond made a note. There's something else. The board wants a statement by end of business tonight. Peterson is pushing for a standard crisis communication apology, termination announcement, commitment to review. He's been using the phrase isolated incident. Isaiah turned from the window to look at Raymond directly. Isolated incident, his words. Isaiah was quiet for a moment. Tell the board I'll speak with them tomorrow morning, in person. And tell Peterson that the phrase isolated incident is not available to us because I have 23 complaint files in my possession that make it unavailable. Raymond typed this. He did not editorialize. One of the things that made him good at his job was his ability to transcribe the things Isaiah said with the understanding that Isaiah had chosen each word deliberately and the transcription was not an interpretation exercise. Nadia stirred without waking, shifted Pepper to a more comfortable configuration, and settled back. The city moved past the windows in its late afternoon mode, the light going low and golden over the rooftops of Queens, the traffic doing its ancient stop-and-breathe rhythm toward the midtown tunnels. Raymond Isaiah said, "Sir, Renee used to call New York the argument for trying," Isaiah said. "She said you couldn't look at that skyline and make a coherent case for giving up." Raymond, who had met Renee 3 times at the company launch event, at a board dinner, and at her memorial service, looked out his own window at the Manhattan skyline emerging in the middle distance, the late light making it exactly the kind of thing a person might construct an argument around. He did not say anything because there was nothing to say, and he understood that. In the back seat, Nadia's voice came small and certain from the near sleep she was drifting through Daddy. "Are we going to make the airplanes nice?" It was the same question she had asked on the flight, or a version of it. The version that arrives in half-sleep, simplified to its essential shape. Isaiah put his hand over hers on the car seat, carefully not waking her. "Yes," he said, quietly in the direction of her sleeping face. The SUV moved into the midtown tunnel, and the city disappeared briefly. And then they emerged on the other side, and the skyline was right there, undeniable vertical. Exactly the argument Renee had described, and Isaiah looked at it through the window for a long time without speaking, and Raymond let him look. The boardroom of Northstar Airlines' New York headquarters occupied the 41st floor of a building in Midtown that had been selected at some point in the airline's history for the quality of its view, and the view was objectively significant. The Hudson on the west side, the cityscape filling the eastern windows, the kind of panorama that was meant to remind the people sitting around the table that what they were making decisions about was large and real and consequential. Isaiah sat at the head of the table. There were 11 board members present, arrayed along the polished length of the table in the arrangement of people who have received difficult news and are waiting to find out how difficult it is going to become. Gerald Whitmore, the board chair, silver-haired, practiced in the management of corporate discomfort. A man who had navigated 15 years of airline turbulence and several actual financial crises, sat 2 chairs to Isaiah's right and opened with the particular language of men in his position when their position requires acknowledging something they would prefer to acknowledge as narrowly as possible. "Isaiah," he said warmly, using the first name as a deliberate instrument. "First and foremost, we are all deeply, deeply sorry about what happened yesterday, to you and to Nadia. It was inexcusable. Brianna Cole's employment with Northstar has been terminated effective this morning, and we are preparing a public statement that Gerald Isaiah said." The board chair stopped. "I'm going to put something in front of each of you," Isaiah said, "and I'd like you to look at it before we continue." He opened the folder he had brought and placed a single document in front of each board member. 12 pages printed the cover page, reading, "Northstar Airlines, Passenger Complaint Review, January 2023, June 2024. The document contained 23 complaints filed through the airline's official complaint channel by passengers of color, each complaint summarized in 2 to 3 paragraphs, each followed by the HR disposition record, each disposition record reading in some variation. Complaint reviewed. No further action required." The board members read. The room was quiet in the way rooms are quiet when people in them are encountering evidence that changes the shape of a conversation they thought they understood. Gerald looked up from the document. "Where did these—" "They were in your complaint system," Isaiah said. "I pulled them the week after the acquisition closed. 23 complaints, 18 months. Not one resulted in a formal counseling record, a crew reassignment, or any documented change in practice." He let this sit. Brianna Cole appears in 7 of them. Peterson, at the far end of the table, set down his document and said nothing. "What I'm proposing," Isaiah said, "is not a crisis management response. What I'm proposing is a structural change to how this airline handles these situations, because the crisis that happened yesterday is not a crisis that happened yesterday. It's a crisis that has been happening in one form or another for at least 18 months, and the evidence of it was sitting in a database on a server in this building the entire time. He outlined what he wanted: an independent audit of all passenger complaints filed in the last 3 years, a new reporting chain that bypassed frontline management for discrimination-related issues, mandatory unconscious bias training for all customer-facing staff, a public accountability dashboard that would report complaint rates and outcomes on a rolling quarterly basis, and the item that produced the most visible reaction from the board: the creation of a passenger dignity division headed by James Okafor, reporting directly to Isaiah's office. Gerald. These initiatives carry significant cost implications, less than the class action lawsuit we're inviting if we don't address the pattern these documents represent, Isaiah said. Less than the brand damage we've already sustained, less than the permanent loss of any passenger who looks like my daughter and decides based on what they've seen this week that this airline is not safe for them. He looked at Gerald. Less than all of that. A pause. And I want James Okafor on the stage with me at the press conference tomorrow morning. Gerald exchanged a glance with the board member to his left, not of disagreement, but of men recalibrating in real time to a leader who has made clear that he does not need their enthusiasm, only their vote. The vote was 9 in favor, 2 abstentions. Gerald voted in favor. Isaiah gathered his folder. We announce at 10 tomorrow. I want every Northstar hub watching the live stream. He stood. And I want the announcement to include Nadia's name. Not because she's my daughter, because she's the reason. The meeting took place not in a boardroom or a legal office, but in a small conference room on the second floor of the Northstar HR building at JFK. A room with no windows, 2 chairs, a table, and the particular institutional quality of a space that has witnessed many conversations that nobody wanted to have. Brianna Cole arrived with her attorney, a competent man named Fredericks, who carried his briefcase with the efficiency of someone who handles these situations regularly and has learned to manage his expectations of them. Brianna's posture when she walked through the door was the posture of someone who has decided in the hours since the flight to position herself as injured, a posture that said, I have been wronged by the version of events that is being presented, a posture that required a certain commitment to maintain in the presence of 14 recordings that showed the same sequence of events from 14 different angles. Isaiah was already seated when they entered. He had a cup of coffee that he hadn't touched. He had no files, no notes, no legal representation present because he had decided that bringing legal representation to this meeting would tell Brianna something about the meeting's purpose that he did not want to tell her. He let Fredericks complete his opening statement. The practiced summary of Brianna's 15 years of service, her exemplary performance reviews the stressful conditions of the flight. The suggestion that the videos lacked context, without interrupting, without expression, without the reactive body language that lawyers look for when they are probing a position. Then he looked at Brianna. I have one question, he said. Brianna met his eyes. When my daughter couldn't breathe, Isaiah said, What did you think would happen if you were wrong about me being a threat? The question landed and stayed. Fredericks opened his mouth. Isaiah held up one hand, not aggressively, just a gesture of patience, of let her answer, and looked at Brianna. Brianna could not answer. Good. Not because she didn't understand the question, but because answering it honestly would require acknowledging something about the morning's decisions that was not compatible with the story she had been constructing since the flight landed, and she had not in the 12 hours since found a way to answer it that didn't dismantle the story. So she said nothing. Isaiah sat with her silence for a moment. I considered offering you a different path, he said. Education, community service, eventually speaking to Northstar employees about what bias looks like from the inside of it, using your experience, including this one, as part of the airline's training. He paused. That offer was real. It was not a legal maneuver. It was based on the belief that people can change what they understand about themselves if they are given an honest accounting of what it looks like from the outside. Fredericks stirred. "But that offer required you to be able to answer the question I just asked," Isaiah said. "And you can't answer it right now? That tells me what I need to know about whether this is the right moment for that path." He stood. Brianna's composure broke along a single line, not dramatically, not with tears, but with the particular compression of a person who has kept a story together through will and is feeling the will begin to fail. 15 years, she said. Not accusation, not even argument. Just the weight of the number itself placed on the table between them like an object. "I know," Isaiah said. He picked up his untouched coffee and walked to the door. He paused there, not for theater, but because something true occurred to him that he wanted to say before the door was between them. "My daughter asked me last night why you stopped her from breathing," he said. "I told her you made a mistake. I hope that's true. I mean that." He left the room. The door closed behind him with the quiet certainty of something finished. In the hallway, he stood for a moment in the institutional light, looking at the untouched coffee in his hand, and then he set it on a side table and walked out into the building where the work was waiting to be done. The atrium of Northstar Airlines New York headquarters was not designed for press conferences, but the facilities team had spent the morning converting it into something that functioned like one. A temporary stage along the west wall, a podium with the Northstar logo displayed behind it, a standing area for approximately 200 people that was now containing approximately 260, the overflow accommodated by a live stream feed projected onto the glass walls of the building's interior mezzanine. Every Northstar hub in the country was watching. Isaiah had made this a condition of the announcement. He stood at the podium at 10:03 in the morning. James Okafor to his left, Raymond Osei to his right, and he looked out at the press pool and the cameras and the Northstar employees watching from the mezzanine and the live stream and the faces of the people in the standing area who had come for various reasons, and he did not begin with the prepared statement Raymond had drafted. He said, "My daughter's name is Nadia. She is 6 years old, and last week she had her first experience on an airplane. I want to tell you what that experience was like." He told them. Not the version shaped for press releases, not the version with the legal language and the careful framing, but the version that started with the check-in agent's half-second expression and moved through the lavatory door and the coffee spill and the 2 inhalers and the sound his daughter's breathing made in the second episode, and he told it in the plain, specific language of a father describing what happened to his child, which is the most persuasive language available to a human being because it requires no interpretation. The room was very still. He announced the audit, the new reporting structure, the training program, the public accountability dashboard. He announced the Passenger Dignity Division and James Okafor's appointment as its head, and the applause from the Northstar employees watching the live stream crashed the server for 40 seconds before the IT team rerouted it. A reporter in the front row asked, "Do you believe this was racially motivated?" Isaiah looked at her. "I believe my daughter couldn't breathe, and someone with the authority to help her chose not to. What you call that is your business. What I do about it is mine." She wrote something down. He gestured toward the front row where Thomas Aldridge sat in a good suit with the upright posture of a man who still believes that the way you present yourself in a room is itself a form of argument. This man spent 40 years on the federal bench, and he spent 3 hours on Flight 1847 speaking up on behalf of 2 strangers because he believed it was right. "Mr. Aldridge, thank you." Thomas inclined his head once with the dignity of someone who does not require more acknowledgement than this. Isaiah looked at the camera. Not performing, not speechifying, just looking at it the way you look at something you want to be honest with. Every person who boards a Northstar flight should be able to sit in their seat without wondering whether the person serving them wishes they weren't there, he said. That is not a revolutionary standard. It is the minimum. We have not met it. We are going to meet it. He stepped back from the podium. James Okafor stepped forward, and the Northstar employees watching the live stream produced a sound that was part applause and part something else. The sound of people who have been quietly doing the right thing in an environment that did not reward them, suddenly finding out that this too has been seen. 3 days after the press conference on a Thursday morning that came in quiet and ordinary through the windows of Isaiah's Manhattan apartment, Nadia sat at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a fistful of crayons, working with the absorbed intensity she brought to drawings she considered important. Isaiah stood at the counter making coffee and watching her without watching her. The peripheral attention of a parent, the kind that runs alongside whatever else you're doing without interrupting it, monitoring for the small signals that tell you whether everything is all right or whether something is not all right. Everything was currently all right. Nadia had slept well for 2 nights following a single bad dream on the night they landed, in which she had been on an airplane that kept getting smaller until there was no room for her and Pepper, both a dream she described to Isaiah in the straightforward manner she applied to difficult things, naming it clearly as if the clarity were a form of management. She had accepted his explanation that bad dreams are the brain doing its filing, sorting through the hard things and looking for where to put them, and she had seemed to find this plausible the way she found most practical explanations plausible when they were offered without condescension. She had not asked much about Brianna in the days since the flight. She had asked once whether Brianna was still working on airplanes, and Isaiah had said no, and Nadia had nodded with the matter-of-fact acceptance of someone for whom this was the correct and logical outcome, and the subject had not come back up. She was drawing now. Isaiah brought his coffee to the table and looked at the drawing over her shoulder, as was his habit, because Nadia's drawings were reliable evidence of what was occupying the deeper levels of her attention, the things she hadn't found words for yet. The drawing showed 2 stick figures on an airplane, both with brown faces, both with round heads and matching purple sneakers, sitting side by side at a window. The window had a sun in it. The plane was smiling, which was an artistic liberty that only Nadia would take, having decided apparently that the plane itself deserved to be happy about its passengers. In the corner of the drawing, in the careful block letters of a child who has recently learned to read her own handwriting, she had written, "Me and Daddy when it's nice." Isaiah stood with his coffee and looked at the drawing for a long time. Nadia looked up at him. "Can we put it on the fridge?" "Yes," he said. "We absolutely can." He took the drawing and found the one remaining magnet the others were holding up Nadia's school schedule, and a reminder about her pediatric appointment, and a picture she had drawn of Pepper in various hats, and he put the new drawing on the refrigerator beside the photograph of Renee. Nadia, standing at his elbow, looked at the photograph. Is she watching what happened? The question arrived as Nadia's most important questions always arrived without preamble or warning, just the direct inquiry of a person who has been thinking about something and has decided the time has come to ask about it. "Yes," Isaiah said. He did not hedge this. He had decided early on that Nadia would have a mother who was present in whatever way was available, and he was not going to undermine that by being philosophically precise at the wrong moment. "Was she scared?" Nadia asked. When the lady stopped your breathing, Isaiah set his coffee down on the counter. He looked at the photograph Renee at 29, laughing at something just outside the frame, the particular unguarded joy of someone who did not know yet that she was being photographed. He looked at Nadia. He sat down on the kitchen floor. It was not a thing he planned. His back found the cabinet beneath the counter and his knees came up, and he was sitting on the kitchen floor the way a person sits when the legs make a decision that the brain has not yet ratified. And for a moment he did not trust what his face was doing, so he looked at his hands on his knees and let the moment be what it was. Nadia climbed into his lap without being asked. She did it with the practical efficiency of a child who understands that her father's lap is a resource for exactly this kind of moment, and she settled herself against his chest with Pepper tucked under one arm, and she put her small hand on his face the way he put his hand on hers when she was frightened. He fell apart. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just the quiet, complete dissolution of a man who has been managing an airline acquisition and a media crisis and a board meeting and a press conference, and his daughter's fear and his own anger for 3 days without locating a moment to simply feel the weight of what had happened, the weight of his daughter's breathing in those 30 seconds, in 2A. The weight of what those 30 seconds contained, what they could have been, what they nearly were. He cried for approximately 2 minutes, which was the amount his body required, and Nadia sat in his lap and held his face and did not say anything, which was exactly right. When he was done, she patted his cheek twice with her palm gently, the way you pat something precious, and said, "It's okay, Daddy. You fixed it." He looked at her. He had Renee's eyes in front of him and a 6-year-old's face, looking at him with the complete absence of judgment that is one of the particular gifts of children who have been loved consistently. "Some things you can't fix," he said, which was the truest thing he had said in 3 days. "You can only carry them differently." Nadia thought about this. She looked at Pepper. She looked at the refrigerator door where the drawing lived now alongside Renee's photograph, the 2 images beside each other in the morning light. The woman who had been here, and the future she had not been here to see. "That's okay, too," Nadia said. "Mama carried things differently all the time. She said that's what strong is." Isaiah looked at his daughter for a long moment in the quiet morning kitchen, the coffee going cool on the counter, the October light coming through the window at its familiar angle, and he thought, there she is. The particular way Renee existed in Nadia, not as memory, not as echo, but as ongoing presence, her wisdom distributed through this small person's observations, arriving when it was most needed in the most unguarded voice available. "Yeah," he said. She did. James Okafor was at his kitchen table in Astoria, Queens on the Thursday evening after the press conference, eating leftover rice and beans that he had made on Sunday and eating without particular pleasure because his mind was elsewhere and had been elsewhere for the better part of a week when his phone rang with a number he did not recognize. He almost didn't answer. He had been fielding calls from 3 documentary crews, 2 journalists and 1 television morning show producer since the story broke, all of which he had declined, because he did not know what to say to any of them that would not take more of himself than he currently had available to give. But something about the timing of this particular call, 9:14 on a Thursday evening, which was an oddly specific time for a media request, made him pick up. "James." The voice was direct and unhurried. "This is Isaiah Drummond." James set down his fork. "I wanted to call you before you had to read about it somewhere," Isaiah said. "I wanted you to hear it from me directly." He told James about the passenger dignity division. He told him about the appointment. He told him the reporting structure and the scope of the role and the fact that it would require James to leave his attendant position, which Isaiah understood was not a small thing to leave. And he said all of this without the corporate framing that would have made it easier to deliver and more distant to receive. James was quiet for a long moment after Isaiah finished. "I've filed complaints before," he said. 27 times. Nothing happened." "I know," Isaiah said. "I read every one." Another silence. The kind that contains things that are being decided rather than just felt. Nadia, James said, "How is she?" "The second episode. Those can sometimes leave residual." "She's fine?" Isaiah said, and the specificity of the question. Not "how are you doing?" but "how is Nadia?" The medical follow-up question, the human question, the question that was not about the airline or the division or the press conference. Landed somewhere Isaiah had not expected it to land. "She's completely fine. She asked me to thank you. She called you the nice man who ran." On the other end of the phone, James laughed. It came out of him the way laughing comes out, when you have not expected to laugh suddenly completely with the relief of something releasing that has been held too long. It was the first time James had laughed in a week, and Isaiah could hear in it the sound of 4 years of 27 entries in a notes app. 4 years of doing the right thing in an environment that did not reward it. Finding at 9:14 on a Thursday evening a small and genuine moment of lightness. "She's something else," James said when the laugh had settled. "She is?" Isaiah agreed. "She gets it from her mother." There was a quality to the silence that followed that was different from the earlier silences. Not the silence of assessment or processing, but the particular silence of two people who have been through the same thing from different positions and have found in the aftermath that they are on the same side of it. "Can I ask you something?" James said. "Yes." "On the flight. When I brought you the apple juice for Nadia the first time before any of it happened, did you know then that I'd seen the manifest flag?" Isaiah thought about it honestly. "I suspected," he said. "I didn't know. What I knew was that you were a person who was paying attention to what was actually happening in that cabin." "I'd been paying attention for 4 years," James said, and the flatness of the delivery, not bitterness. Just the weight of the plain fact said everything about what 4 years of paying attention without anyone reciprocating the attention does to a person. "I know," Isaiah said. "That's why I need you in this role. Not because you were in the right place at the right time. Because you've been doing the work for 4 years without anyone giving you a reason to keep doing it, and you kept doing it anyway. That's not luck. That's character." James was quiet. "The division isn't a reward," Isaiah said. "I want you to understand that. It's a responsibility. It's going to be hard, and it's going to require you to advocate for passengers in an institution that hasn't historically made that easy, and there will be days when it doesn't feel like enough." "I know what that feels like," James said. "I know you do," Isaiah said. "That's the whole point." After the call ended, James sat at his kitchen table in Astoria for a long time, his rice and beans cooling the city, doing its evening sounds outside the window. The particular layered audio of Queens on a weeknight traffic and voices, and the distant rhythm of someone's music 3 floors up. And he thought about the 27 entries in his notes app, the 27 times he had written something down because writing it down was the only thing available to him, and he thought about what it meant that the 27th entry had been read. He opened the notes app. He added one more entry. Flight 1847. Called by I. Drummond, 9:14 p.m. Noted for record, someone read the file. Then he put down the phone and finished his dinner. The letter arrived at Isaiah's office on a Monday morning 10 days after the press conference, in an envelope addressed by hand in the careful upright script of someone who learned to write before the age of keyboards, and has maintained the practice as a form of integrity. Inside was a single sheet of cream stationery covered front and back in the same careful hand. Thomas Aldridge. The letter explained in its opening paragraph did not email for significant communications. He believed that email encouraged a kind of haste that significant communications did not deserve, that the act of writing something by hand required you to know what you meant before you committed it to the page, and this discipline was worth the inconvenience. He wrote about what he had observed on Flight 1847, not the events which Isaiah had lived and did not need described, but the specific quality of how Isaiah had moved through them. The stillness, Thomas wrote, was not passivity. He had spent 40 years on the federal bench, and he understood the difference between a man who was still because he had nothing to say and a man who was still because he understood with deep precision exactly what he was choosing not to say, and when. The second kind of stillness, Thomas wrote, was the hardest discipline available to a person, and he had not seen it demonstrated more completely than he had seen it in Seat 2B. He wrote about his late wife Eleanor, who had been denied a first-class seat in 1971 by a gate agent at O'Hare, who had told her without apparent embarrassment that the seat was reserved for passengers who were better suited to the environment. Eleanor had not flown again for 11 years. When she finally did, she had chosen an airline at random and sat in coach, and she had never once mentioned the 1971 incident to anyone except Thomas, and she had mentioned it to Thomas only once near the end when she was making an accounting of the things she had carried. Thomas was 82 years old. He had outlived Eleanor by 7 years. He had outlived enough things to understand that outcomes in the long run were not the measure of a life, that the measure was in the moments when the choice was clear and difficult, and a person chose correctly anyway. He ended the letter with a single sentence. The most dangerous thing a man with power can do is remember what it felt like not to have it. Isaiah read the letter twice at his desk, then a third time. He set it down on the desktop and looked out the window at the midtown skyline for a moment, and then he picked up the phone and called his assistant and asked her to find a frame that would fit a single sheet of cream stationery. The letter went on the wall above his desk between the Northstar logo and a photograph of Nadia at 3 years old, asleep in Renee's arms in a hospital chair, the photograph taken on a day when Nadia was ill, and they had spent 8 hours in the pediatric emergency room, and Renee had not slept, and she had still managed, when Isaiah had pointed the phone at her in the early morning light, to look like someone at peace. The letter stayed on that wall for the duration of Isaiah's tenure at Northstar Airlines, which was long and changed the airline considerably. Valerie Okonkwo was a pediatric nurse from Chicago's South Side, and she had been on Flight 1847 because she was flying to New York for a nursing conference that she attended every other year. A conference that was less about the presentations and more about the particular sustenance of being in a room with 500 other people who understood what the job actually was. She had been recording since the lavatory incident, not because she was a journalist or an activist or someone who had decided in advance to document anything, but because she was a pediatric nurse, which meant she had spent the better part of a decade being trained to notice when a child was in danger and take action, and what she had seen in the forward aisle of Flight 1847 had activated every wire in that training simultaneously. She had said no to 3 documentary crews and a television morning show and a digital magazine that had offered her what she later described to her mother as a number that would have paid my student loans because she was not interested in her footage becoming content. She was interested in her footage being used correctly. She called Isaiah's office directly on the Friday after the press conference, having found the number through the Northstar corporate directory, and she worked through 2 assistants before reaching Raymond Osei, who listened to her for 3 minutes and then transferred her without ceremony to Isaiah. They talked for 40 minutes. She told him about the flight, not the facts, which he knew, but the experience of witnessing it, the particular helplessness of watching something wrong happen in a contained space, where the usual mechanisms for stopping wrong things had either broken down or been deliberately turned off. She told him about the moment she had started recording, not the coffee spill, not the lavatory, but the moment Nadia had reached out with Pepper toward Brianna, and Brianna had simply walked past, as if the child did not exist. "That was when I knew," Valerie said. "Because I've seen that look before. In triage. When a person in authority decides that the patient in front of them doesn't require full attention. I know that look." She told him about her own flights, the times the aircraft weight distribution had required apparently that she specifically be relocated to the back row. The time she had identified a passenger going into anaphylactic shock and offered to assist, and the flight attendant had looked at her badge, the badge she wore because she never traveled without it, a habit from her first year in the ER, and said, "We'll call you if we need you," in the voice of someone who was not planning to call her. Isaiah listened. He did not offer solutions or context or reassurance. He just listened, which Valerie noted later when she told the story to her colleagues was rarer in people with authority than it should be. At the end of the conversation, Isaiah asked about the footage. "I don't want to sell it," Valerie said. "I don't want it on the news anymore. I want it used in training." She paused. "But only if you show the part where nobody said anything for the first 10 minutes. I watched 7 people in that cabin see what was happening and decide it wasn't their business. That part matters. Especially that part Isaiah said." A brief silence. "My daughter is okay," Isaiah said. "I want you to know that. She's completely fine. She drew a picture of the airplane this week and labeled it 'When It's Nice.' I thought you'd want to know that's where she landed." Valerie was quiet on the other end of the phone, in the way of someone who has held a lot of difficult things for a lot of children and does not always find out how those children are doing afterward. "Good," she said. Just the word, but fully. She sent the footage 3 days later, all 19 minutes of it unedited with the first 10 minutes of silence intact. James Okafor used it in the first passenger dignity training session 8 weeks later, and he used it without commentary for the first 7 minutes, letting the silence in the recording sit in the room with the crew members watching, and then he stopped the video and asked one question. "What would it have cost you to say something?" The room was very quiet after that question. The good kind of quiet, the kind that comes when people are thinking rather than waiting for permission to think. The letter from Fredericks Brianna's attorney arrived at Isaiah's office 6 weeks after the press conference, a single paragraph, formal and economical, informing him that Brianna Cole had enrolled in a community-based intercultural education program as part of a separately negotiated civil agreement that Isaiah's legal team had nothing to do with, and that had been arranged through a restorative justice organization Fredericks had apparently suggested. The letter did not contain an apology from Brianna herself. Isaiah had not expected one, and he did not feel, reading the letter in the morning quiet of his office, any particular absence where an apology might have been. An apology would have been for him. What the education program was for was something larger and less legible, and whether it would take hold in Brianna Cole specifically was a question that only time and Brianna could answer, and neither of those things was within Isaiah's jurisdiction. He read the letter once. He placed it in the file with the other documents from the acquisition period. The complaint logs, the HR records, the board, minutes, the press coverage, the copy of Thomas's letter that he had made before framing the original. The file was thick. It would continue to get thicker as the audit progressed, and the new reporting system began returning its first data. And Isaiah would read all of it because he had decided that one of the things ownership meant was not looking away from the evidence the institution produced about itself. He closed the file. "From the hallway, Daddy." "Come look." Nadia's voice carrying the particular urgency of someone who has found something that requires immediate adult witness. Isaiah put on his jacket and went. In the living room, Nadia had arranged Pepper and 3 other stuffed animals in a semicircle on the floor, facing a small easel she had constructed from 2 rulers and a piece of cardboard on which she had drawn what appeared to be an airplane, with a very large smiling face and multiple windows, each window containing a small brown or yellow or pink circle, representing presumably a passenger. "It's the nice airplane," Nadia explained. "I'm teaching them about it." Isaiah stood in the doorway of his living room and looked at his daughter conducting a lesson for her stuffed animals about an airplane with a smiling face. And he thought about the complaint files and the form letters and the drawer that no one opened, and he thought about what comes after the drawer. The long, unspectacular work of changing an institution from the inside, the daily accountability meetings and the training sessions and the public dashboards, and the decisions made in 100 ordinary moments by 100 ordinary crew members who have been shown clearly and repeatedly that the decision matters. He thought about all of that, and then he thought about none of it, because Nadia was looking at him over her shoulder with the expression of a child who wants her audience to be paying attention. "Come sit down," she said. "I haven't gotten to the best part yet." He sat down on the living room floor, cross-legged, next to the stuffed animals. "Okay," he said. "I'm ready." 6 weeks after Flight 1, 847 landed at JFK, and everything that followed from that landing had been set in motion. Isaiah and Nadia boarded Northstar Flight 302 from Atlanta to Chicago for Nadia's first trip to visit Renee's family. Her grandmother Gloria, her 2 aunts, her 4 cousins, who ranged in age from 4 to 11, and whom she had not seen since the summer. Isaiah had specifically not arranged for James Okafor to be on this flight. Not because James wouldn't have been welcome, he would have been more than welcome, but because Isaiah wanted to see whether the changes had taken root on their own, in a crew that didn't know the owner would be in 2A, in an ordinary morning at an ordinary gate, with no particular reason for anyone to perform anything for anyone. He wanted to see the new normal without the people who had built it standing in the frame. The gate agent at Hartsfield-Jackson greeted them by name warmly without performance, with the specific warmth of someone who has been trained to understand that knowing a passenger's name is a form of respect and not a form of theater. She was young, a few months into the job by the look of her, and she gave Nadia a Northstar sticker without being asked, pressing it onto Pepper's ear with the gravity of someone performing a minor ceremony. Nadia accepted this with equal gravity. "Pepper has a sticker now," she reported to Isaiah. "He's very official." Isaiah agreed. Security was uneventful. Isaiah moved through the priority lane and emerged on the other side, without pause, without additional screening, without the specific texture of being measured against a standard applied differently to the passengers around him. And the absence of that texture was so complete that it registered as its own kind of information. The information that ordinary feels like. At the gate, a Northstar employee recognized Isaiah and offered a nod of acknowledgement that was respectful rather than deferential. The nod of someone who understands that the CEO of a company flying coach, or first class in this case, is not there to be treated differently than any other passenger, and who has been trained to understand why that matters. The lead flight attendant on Flight 302 was a black woman named Dara, composed and genuinely warm in the particular way that warmth is genuine when it is applied consistently rather than selectively. And she crouched to Nadia's eye level in the jet bridge without being asked, extending one hand toward Pepper with the courtesy of someone meeting a companion for the first time. "And who's this?" she asked. Pepper Nadia said. "He flies now." "He does?" Dara agreed with the absolute seriousness the situation required. "Does he have a window seat preference?" Nadia looked at Isaiah. "Does he?" Window Isaiah confirmed. Pre-flight drinks came to their row at the same pace and with the same quality of attention as every other row in first class. Dara addressed a white businessman in 3C by his name from the manifest. She addressed Isaiah by his name from the manifest. The standard was the standard applied everywhere, which was the only version of the standard that was not a performance. Nadia pressed her face to the window for takeoff. She did it without hesitation, without the small flinch Isaiah had been watching for the residual wariness that bad experiences leave in the body even after the mind has processed them and filed them over. She pressed her face to the glass with the total, unguarded attention of someone in the presence of something that delights them. And she narrated the ground roll to Pepper in a low, patient voice. And when the wheels left the tarmac, she said with absolute joy, "We're flying, Pepper." "Look." Isaiah watched her. He had been watching her in various ways for 6 years, watching for signs of what she needed, watching for the particular signals that told him she was struggling before she could name it, watching with the specific vigilance of a parent who is also the only parent, and who understands that vigilance is love made practical. And what he was watching now at cruising altitude over Georgia was his daughter at the window with no weight on her, just the uncomplicated wonder of a child experiencing flight. He opened his laptop. Not for acquisition documents or complaint logs or board materials, he had left those at the office deliberately, because today was not that day. He opened a folder with Nadia's school enrollment forms for September, a task that had been waiting quietly in a corner of his to-do list through everything that had happened, and he began working through it with the methodical attention of a man who understands that the most important administrative task in his life is not currently airline related. Midway through the flight, a white child of about 5 wandered through the first-class curtain from economy, the standard small adventure of a child who has spotted something interesting on the other side of a door that no one has explicitly told them is forbidden. Dara caught him gently at the curtain crouched to his level, said something that made him laugh and turned him back toward economy with the unhurried kindness of someone who has no reason to make a small child feel he has done something wrong. Isaiah watched this exchange and noted it and said nothing because noting it without needing to act on it was exactly the right response, and he recognized the difference. Nadia fell asleep with Pepper in her lap and her head on Isaiah's arm, the boneless, confident sleep of a child who is exactly where she is supposed to be. And Isaiah stayed still under her weight and did not reach for his phone or his laptop or anything at all, just sat with the window on his left and his daughter on his right, and the clouds doing their unhurried work outside. He thought about Renee, not with grief, not with the particular ache of absence that had been the texture of most of the thoughts he had had about Renee in the 18 months since the hospital, but with warmth, the specific warmth of a memory that has been through enough processing to arrive on the other side as something you can simply hold without the holding, requiring you to also hold the loss. He thought she would have liked this altitude. He thought she would have liked watching Nadia sleep like that. He looked out the window at the clouds at 37,000 feet, where the light comes in sideways and has no color name, where the horizon is a clean line and everything below it is equally small and equally important. He let himself be here fully in this seat, in this quiet, with his daughter, asleep against his arm, and the world doing its ordinary work below them. Gloria Reyes, Renee's mother, a woman of 64, with Renee's eyes and Renee's particular quality of stillness, which was the stillness of someone who has endured considerable things and has learned to inhabit the present moment as a form of resistance against those things was waiting at arrivals when they came through the gate. Nadia saw her from 20 feet away and stopped walking and looked at Isaiah with the wide-eyed expression of a child checking whether the thing in front of them is actually real. And Isaiah said, "Go ahead," before she could ask, and Nadia went ahead at the pace of a 6-year-old who has decided that sprinting is the appropriate response to the situation. Gloria caught her with the ease of someone who has been catching this specific child for the entirety of this specific child's life, and the reunion was exactly what a reunion between a grandmother and a granddaughter who have not seen each other in 4 months should be: uncomplicated, physical, loud in the good way, Pepper held up for inspection and approved of with the serious formality that Nadia required. Isaiah hung back for a moment and watched them together and felt the specific warmth of watching love demonstrate itself in its most direct form, the form that does not require articulation or context. In the car to Gloria's house, a 2012 Civic that Gloria drove with the confident unhurriedness of someone who has been navigating the same South Side streets for 30 years and does not require the GPS's opinion. Nadia sat in the back seat with Pepper and her window and the Chicago landscape moving past her, and she was quiet in the way she was quiet when she was thinking rather than resting. 20 minutes into the drive she spoke. "Daddy," she said, "if the mean lady had known you owned the airplane, do you think she would have been nice?" Isaiah looked out the passenger window at a row of apartment buildings passing in the midday light. He thought about the question with the honesty it deserved, which was the only way he knew how to think about questions from Nadia. "Probably," he said. Nadia turned this over. Her brow had the furrow it got when she was working something out, Renee's furrow on Renee's brow in a 6-year-old's face. "But that's not really being nice," she said. "If you're only nice because you're scared, that's just being scared. It's not the same thing." Isaiah turned from the window and looked at her. "No," he said, "it's not." "So what's the point of being the boss?" Nadia asked, "if people are only nice when they're scared of you?" The question was perfectly constructed. Isaiah knew it was perfectly constructed, and he also knew that Nadia had not constructed it as an argument, but as a genuine inquiry, the kind that arrives from the part of the mind that is still undefended enough to ask the questions everyone else has learned to work around. He didn't have an answer. He sat with the absence of an answer for a moment, which was his honest response to the question. From the driver's seat without turning, without the question having been addressed to her, Gloria said, "The point is, you keep going until the fear isn't what makes them nice." A silence. Gloria's eyes found Isaiah's in the rearview mirror. Renee's eyes in an older face looking at him with the combination of steadiness and warmth that he had understood from the beginning was where Renee had come from. He did not speak. Neither did she. The understanding between them needed no translation, because it was the understanding that exists between people who have loved the same person and who recognize in each other the shape of that love. Nadia looked out her window at Chicago moving past. "Okay," she said with the matter-of-fact finality of someone who has received an answer they can work with. That makes sense. Gloria's house on the south side was the kind of house that had been lived in thoroughly. Walls covered in photographs, bookshelves too full a kitchen that smelled of the accumulated evidence of every meal that had ever been cooked in it. A backyard where Nadia's 4 cousins were conducting a game that appeared to have its own complete and non-negotiable rule set. Nadia assessed the situation from the back porch, determined the rules were comprehensible, and entered the game without ceremony. Isaiah sat in the kitchen with Gloria and a cup of coffee, and the particular ease of a man who is for the first time in several weeks not required to be anything in particular, and they talked about small things for a while. Nadia's school year, the cousins' activities, the neighborhood's slow evolution over the 30 years Gloria had lived in it, and then Gloria went to the hutch in the living room and came back with a photograph. It was a small photograph, the square format of an older camera, its edges worn at the corners from handling. It showed a child 7 years old, dark-eyed, a girl with Nadia's exact nose pressing her face to an airplane window. Through the oval glass behind her was a bright blue sky. The child's expression was the expression of someone in the presence of something that delights them entirely. Her first flight, Gloria said. 1997. She talked about it for 3 weeks after. Isaiah held the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. She used to say planes made her feel like problems were the right size, Gloria said, small enough to see all at once from up high. Isaiah set the photograph down on the kitchen table. He picked it up again. He carried it to the window and held it in the afternoon light, the same light that was currently falling on the backyard where Nadia was running in circles with 4 cousins, Pepper tucked under her arm, her laughter carrying through the glass. He asked if he could keep it. Gloria said yes before he finished asking. That evening on the back porch with the cousins wound down and the yard quiet and the Chicago evening coming in mild and dark around them, Nadia found Isaiah sitting on the bench and climbed up beside him without announcement. She was carrying a new drawing, a plane window, a little girl looking out a bright yellow circle in the corner, labeled in careful block letters, Mama's Son. Isaiah looked at the drawing for a long time. He took off his phone case, the plain black case he had carried for 3 years, and slid the drawing in behind his ID card and Renee's photograph beside it, and replaced the case. Nadia watched this with approval. "Now they're both there," she said. "Now they're both there," he agreed. 1 month after the first new flight, Isaiah boarded Northstar Flight 411 from New York to Atlanta on a Tuesday morning with no agenda, no Raymond, no board documents, no particular destination in mind beyond the return to the city where the townhouse was and Nadia's school and the kitchen table where the drawings went up on the refrigerator. He had a window seat in first class. He had a book he had been trying to read for 3 months. He had a cup of coffee and the particular quality of a Tuesday morning that has not yet decided what it's going to be. He watched the service, not as an evaluation, not with the clipboard mind of an owner assessing compliance, not with the comparative eye of a man checking the new version against the old one, but the way a person watches something they built with their hands to see if it stands on its own when they're not holding it up. The lead flight attendant on this flight was a man named Curtis, who was neither James nor Dara nor anyone Isaiah had met before, and Curtis moved through the first-class cabin with the ease and consistency of someone for whom treating every passenger with equal care was simply the job. Not a policy he was executing, but a standard he had internalized, which was the only version of the standard that was not at some level a performance. In seats 2C and 2D, a young black couple, maybe 30, dressed simply first-class tickets, a weekend bag in the overhead. They received the same quality of attention as the older white couple in 1A and 1B, and the businesswoman in 3C, and Isaiah himself in 2A. Same warmth, same specificity, same unforced ease. Curtis brought the woman in 2C a refill on her coffee before she had finished asking for it. She turned to her partner and said something that made him laugh. Neither of them looked around to check if the attention was going to continue. Neither of them did the particular calculation Isaiah had watched himself and Nadia do on Flight 1, 847, the constant peripheral monitoring for the moment when the warmth stopped. They just were there, without needing to earn it. Isaiah looked away from them back to his window. Outside clouds at 36,000 feet, the late morning light at altitude coming in sideways through the oval glass, that particular quality of brightness that doesn't have a color name because it isn't quite gold and isn't quite white, and it isn't quite anything except what light looks like when it's above most of the things that usually complicate it. He took out his phone, found the photo case. Renee, at 7 years old, face to the airplane window, the whole bright sky behind her. Nadia's drawing the window, the little girl. Mama's son in the corner. He set them both on the tray table, the old photograph and the new drawing side by side in the morning light, and he looked at them for a while, not with grief and not with effort, just with the clean, uncomplicated attention of a man looking at something that matters to him. He thought about what Nadia had said in Gloria's car. That's not really being nice, if you're only nice because you're scared. He thought about what Gloria had said. You keep going until the fear isn't what makes them nice. He thought about the couple in 2C and 2D who had not needed to check, who had sat in their seats and been exactly as present as they were supposed to be because the space around them had been built to allow that. Not perfectly, not completely, not without the ongoing maintenance of the people committed to doing the work, but enough. Enough for this morning. Enough to be visible. That was the thing he was building. Not a policy, though the policy was part of it. Not a punishment, though the consequences were real. Not a brand transformation or a press moment or an industry shift, though all of those were happening, would keep happening, would continue to produce their ripples outward into the world beyond his office. What he was building was simpler and harder than any of those things. He was building a world where his daughter could press her face to a plane window and feel exactly as much wonder as she was supposed to feel. Nothing added to it, nothing taken from it. Just the wonder clean and complete with nothing underneath it but the ground being 37,000 feet away. He closed his eyes. Outside the window, the clouds moved through the light. The plane flew on. End. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories about ordinary people who do extraordinary things when it matters most. And in the comments tell us, have you ever witnessed a moment where someone chose to do the right thing when it would have been easier not to? We read everyone.